We're your hosts,
Aaron Bacus
and Jason Kindler.
We like to sit down with our guests to hear their journey, their challenges, and how they impact the local community.
So grab a seat, tune in, and let's get inspired by Jacksonville's everyday workforce.
Welcome to Hometown Jax. Sam Kouvaris, Aaron Bacus, it's so happy to have you on Hometown Jax. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks for having me. I lived in Mandarin for almost 40 years.
Okay.
So it was very familiar territory for me to get here.
I'm glad you made it over the ditch over here. And I know it's probably a little weird when this strange guy pops out and asks you to be on a podcast. But I did go through a mutual friend.
Yes,
and hopefully that gave me a little bit of credibility.
My friend
maybe
Rob,
or maybe not. I don't know.
If you were good enough for my friend Rob, you were good enough for me. But didn't Rick Wilkins used to have his baseball training academy right here?
Could be.
I'm pretty sure this is where it was. Yeah,
okay. We've
for a
only
long
been
time.
here a little over a year, so we like it. It's a good centralized spot for our employees.
Yeah,
but,
perfect.
Very excited to have you on here. Now, I grew up in Gainesville, so you're kind of a legend in my mind because you were the guy on the TV all the time.
Yeah, we were the dominant TV station in Gainesville until we gave up our CBS affiliation.
Yeah,
for a long time.
We have a lot of younger people that work here.
Yeah.
And I mentioned the name Sam Kouvaris.
No idea who I am.
They have no idea who you are.
Absolutely.
But I explained to them.
But part of that is the duration since after they got rid of me on TV, I wrote for the paper for 3 years.
Right.
But part of that is, I worked in the golden age of local television.
Right.
Nobody watches local television anymore, and I still pay attention to the numbers and the people who are watching. There's nobody watching, whatsoever, because they did it to themselves actually. But the information age that we live in, people can get their information from wherever they want.
Right.
And whenever I speak at groups, which believe it or not is still pretty often, I do this little exercise with them about how the onus on getting information and getting the truth has gone from the deliverer to the receiver.
Interesting.
It used to be my job. If I said it on the air, you knew it was true, right? Now, no more.
Right.
It's the receivers, it's the consumer's job to determine what's true and who they're going to trust.
Which is a major
shift.
When you say that, I think of Peter Jennings. Like that
Peter Jennings had an agenda. But then again, I'm not saying that negatively.
Right.
Walter Cronkite had an agenda.
Right.
They all had agendas because they're human beings.
Right.
And they saw things a certain way.
Yeah.
And so you had to kind of couch it, plus they were the only source.
Right.
There was the morning paper and the evening news,
right.
and that was it.
Right.
I used to come on the air on Tuesdays, and people would ask me what the coach said at the game on Saturday. Now, when I drive to a Gator club or a Bulldog club meeting on a Tuesday night, I have to ask them what happened at practice because they're on their phones looking at the practice report in the time that I was driving there.
Yeah.
So, it's completely changed.
Well, the only thing I was thinking, though, is I still feel like local has still appeal. What I mean is local paper or local news, because people really want to be informed about local. I feel like, and probably justifiably so, you want to tune out the national. I'm still interested in what's going on in my community.
And in all honesty, then the onus is on business owners like you to support local news outlets.
Right.
Because without that, they can't stay in business.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what's happening. Look at the newspaper. I mean, nobody advertises in the newspaper.
Right.
Look at television. If it wasn't for car dealers and lawyers, there was a 5-year span that we might as well call ourselves rooms to go because they were the only people advertising at the time.
I don't think the lawyers ever let up. They were always there.
That's right.
So did a lot of research on you, Sam. So let's go through kind of the progression
See
here.
if any of it's true.
A Terrapin, huh? Who was the coach? Who was? Does that go all the way back to Lefty or?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
He was the basketball coach. I went and played football and baseball at Clemson my freshman year.
Okay.
And sorry, I'm fighting a little head cold. My birthday is Thanksgiving, and I'm the oldest of 4.
Okay.
And so my mother sent me to school early.
Okay.
Because the cutoff then was January 1st.
Okay.
So I was always the youngest kid in class.
Yeah.
So I was at Clemson as a freshman. I was still 17. And, I stepped into the huddle. I was a quarterback. I stepped into the huddle. Half of those guys were married with kids, So I was kind of a little bit out of my element there for for a while. And so after a year there, football and baseball on the freshman and JV teams, I left, transferred back to Maryland because I actually, in my second semester, I took an elective. I was a pre-med major.
Right.
And
about you.
They got rid of the pre-med program.
At Maryland, when you went to
No,
Maryland?
at Clemson.
Okay.
And so I was looking around for another major, decided I'd major in political science, which I really liked. But one of the electives was Introduction to Broadcasting. And toward the end of the semester, the professor pulled me aside and he said, I think you should think about this as a career. I said, why? He said, I've taught this class a lot. He said, you have the aptitude for it. And let me give you 7 different schools that can help you. Because Clemson's not one of them.
Right.
And one of them was Maryland.
Interesting.
And I said, that's funny. I still have in-state status.
What do you think
there.
he meant by aptitude? Just willingness to talk to people, or like what was?
Well, when you
things that
take
stood
that
out?
course, you do all the different things. You do your job, you do this job, you do Amelia's job, you do the sound person's job. And so, either you love it or not. And then if you do these jobs, there's no skill to that. You either have this skill or you don't.
Right.
I mean, and you can tell, there are people that have been on television for 25 years, and I could name 4 of them right now. And every day you watch them, it's like their first day on TV.
Right.
But, there's at some point, and I can give you my theory on, the 4 stages of being on television. The first and the last are you're terrified, by the way. But there comes a time where you don't act like yourself, because then you're acting like a version of yourself that you think exists.
Right.
No, you actually are yourself.
Right.
And that's terrifying because then everybody knows you, right? And when you walk into a room, they don't know that, but you know that.
Right.
And that can be terrifying because the truth is 20% of the people aren't going to like you.
It's just the way it goes.
Life is.
Yeah,
right.
that's the way it goes. So obviously you were into sports. I mean, that was a natural inclination from day one, right?
I mean, I played, I was a, 3-sport varsity athlete in high school, and, like everybody, I was all county and all that other stuff. But, at some point in your life, somebody tells you you're not good enough to play anymore. I mean, they told Tom Brady that at one point, right? I mean, of course, he was 44 years old, but at some point they tell you, you're not good enough to play at this level. But I wanted to stay close to the games and close to the competition. And I found a profession that allowed me to do that, and at the same time continue with my competitive nature it's just a part of me to compete.
Well, how do you compete as are you competing ratings? Is that kind of what you mean? Or
well, that's
it's
part of
very
it.
Competitive business that
But,
way.
when I was in television, my competition was breaking stories against the newspaper, because they were the same level of journalists, trying to compete at that level. I mean, in television, there's all kinds of stuff. I gave Dan Hicken his first job. He's a close friend of mine. And when he left and went over to Channel 12 originally to do weekends, over time he developed kind of a shtick on the air, which has been very successful for him. But if you know Dan, that's only a small part of his personality. But he expands that on TV. So you have to be somewhat of an entertainer. But in terms of competition, I always looked at the newspaper. We're trying to compete to break stories against them, and and we won more than we didn't, and I was pretty proud of that.
I always wondered, especially a sports reporter, you're reporting stories that could be difficult to the person you're reporting on, but yet you still need that person for information. Like you're reporting a not so great story about a running back, and you have to go in the locker room the next week and face them. So how do you keep that line?
Mike Rozier threatened my life.
Oh wow.
He wasn't the only one, but he was the first one.
That was the whole beating thing, wasn't it? With him?
That was he was with the Bulls. He had a very serious drug problem at the time. Hopefully he's finished it. But he said, the whole story is Don Bessalou, who played for the Dolphins, came to play for the Bulls, had said in the media that he was going to start dropping interceptions on purpose until they gave him a new contract. And so to follow that up, Rozier said, I think I'm going to fumble on purpose until they give me a new contract. And I said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard on the air, right? So when I was in the locker room, he threatened me. The bad thing was my dad was with me that day, walking through the locker room. And at the time, my dad was 44 years old, maybe.
Okay.
And when Rozier threatened me, I felt this thing on my shoulder. And I finally realized it was my dad trying to get over me to get it. I said, Dad, this guy's going to kill you, okay? He's just relax.
Now, that would have been an interesting story for your competition report.
That's for sure.
That Sam and his dad get in a fight with star athlete.
But, being a reporter is about creating relationships, 100%. And if you can create relationships and earn the trust of the people that you're reporting on, that's the most important thing that you can do.
But that earning that trust comes with them knowing that you're going to report a story honestly.
Honestly.
Even if it's...
good or bad.
Right.
Jimmy Smith said to me one day, he said, I thought we were boys. So we are. He said, you said I short-armed that catch over the middle. I said, you did. He goes, I know. but yeah, I didn't expect you to say that. I said, everybody saw it. I said, if I don't say it, I have no credibility. I said, I understand you're protecting your career, but, the ball was there and you alligator armed it. And he goes, yeah, I guess so. But, it's about creating relationships. When I first came here in 1981, Jake Godbold was mayor. And I don't know why he took a liking to me, but I talked to Jake every Tuesday and Thursday immediately after the 6 o'clock news. My phone at my desk would ring, and he would give me a background of what was going on, not just in sports, but in the city. Uh-huh. And so he gave me all kinds of information, knowing, or at first, figuring out whether he could trust me. And then eventually knowing that I would not break his confidence, but it would give me context to my reporting, which is why we were so many times so far ahead of everybody else, because we knew what was going to happen and we were preparing for that. Without these days, it would be on social media immediately.
Right.
I mean, I taught a class with Dan Hicken once at UNF, and I'm telling the story about Touchdown Jacksonville and the then president being picked up for solicitation on Route 1. And I tell the whole story about how I talked to him and he denied it, and I was getting anonymous phone calls and all this other stuff. And one woman in the back raises her hand and says, I'd have just put it on Twitter. And I said, wait a minute. You don't have any verifiable sources, and you're going to put this on Twitter. You're going to ruin this man's life, maybe, just by putting something on Twitter. The guy next to her raises his hand and said, I don't believe half the stuff I put on Twitter anyway. And Dan says, well, then that's the difference. Very illustrative for us. Because if Dan or I said it on TV, you can take it to the bank that was an absolute true statement. I mean, when the whole Tebow thing, when Tim was going to be traded from Denver, I had a source in the room when the Jaguars were negotiating, and I'm tweeting it in real time. And some guy who I know, coached my son in soccer, tweets and says, I don't know what you're doing. Who's your source? And usually I don't respond but I wrote him back and I said, that's my job, right? That's kind of what I do. Uh-huh. So anyway.
Speaking of sources, I always think that's super interesting. So I'm assuming you had a lot of them.
Well, that's the only way that you can survive, I think, if you want to be a real journalist, which, by the way, has almost disappeared. That job has almost disappeared.
Right. Journalist meaning you're really investigating the story before you.
As I said,
what's disappeared about it? The trust or the actual work ethic, or what
all
do you
of
think?
It.
Okay.
All of it. I mean, young people don't trust things that are coming out. Mm-hmm. And, if I said to you, Trevor Lawrence isn't going to start Sunday, you wouldn't turn the TV on or turn the radio on or go to a website. You'd pick up your phone and you'd Google Trevor Lawrence Sunday, right? Mm-hmm. And since Google keeps it a secret, what the algorithm is, the first 50 stories that are populated, you don't know how they got to the top of the list there.
Right.
But I can tell you that 48 of them were written by AI.
Right. That's
and not maybe. No, they were. And so as you scroll through, if it says Trevor Lawrence to sit on Sunday by Sam Kouvaris, I hope you, Aaron, would say, oh, I know Sam. He's a trusted source, and click on that and see that. But that's where, journalism has changed because people just want to flood the airwaves or
there's really no
internet
repercussion for telling
whatsoever.
a lie. Like it doesn't,
Nobody pays the price, but they're paying the price by nobody paying attention. Nobody is watching local news.
Right.
I mean, they're getting no numbers whatsoever because people don't trust that.
Right. Well, you could say that for a lot of news for sure. So went to Maryland. You started a career.
I'm sorry, graduated from Maryland.
Maryland.
A lot of people went to Maryland.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I actually graduated.
Then went to University of Charleston after that?
I worked in Charleston.
That's where you worked.
Worked in Charleston. Worked a lot with the College of Charleston there.
How did you get the job right out of college?
So at the time, at both the beginning and the end of my career, I fought against kind of an affirmative action. They were hiring no white males, right? Either at the beginning or at the end of my career. And so I got my degree in directing, actually. Directing. And I really liked directing a lot. Mm-hmm. And went into the TV. I was bartending in D.C., and
not a bad gig.
No, it was a great gig. I was making a lot of money, meeting a lot of people.
What bar?
Yeah, I worked at a place called the Poorhouse Pub.
Okay, downtown.
P-O-U-R.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. House Pub. Yeah, and it was fabulous. I started. I was at what was called in Florida Steak and Ale, but there it was called the Jolly Ox, and I was the head waiter there, and I got a job as a bartender in D.C. Like you said, it's a great job. The bar I was working at was in the shadow of two of the television stations there in town, and got to know all the on-air and behind-the-scenes people. Mm-hmm. And I, having my degree in directing, I got to know the directors really well, and they had me sit in and watch and see what they were doing. And they all said, listen, you can't get into this business on this end because I've been here 35 years. He's been here 32. We're not going anywhere, But where they'll hire you is if you can go on TV. And one of the guys at Channel 5, which is now the Fox there, let me sneak in on a Sunday night after their 10 o'clock news. And he said, when the red light comes on, start talking. And so I wrote some scripts and I did that. And he came down and he looked at me and he goes, oh, you actually want to do this? Mm-hmm. I said, yeah, what do you mean? He goes, everybody says they want to be a sportscaster. He said, listen, when you talk about the Orioles, I've got highlights. When you talk about the French Open, I've got highlights. So we'll do it again. And when that happens, just look at the TV screen and go ahead and do that. So I made this audition tape, put it under my arm, started driving south, went to Richmond, went to Wilmington, North Carolina, where they offered me a job, went to a bunch of different places, went to 3 stations in Charleston, South Carolina. And the second one, the guy said, the first one, the guy said, I like your tape, and I got a guy. And it turned out to be a close friend of mine over the years, Warren Pepper. Second place, the guy said, I really like your tape, but I got a guy. In fact, I just hired him from Channel 2. I walked in at I said, I got an appointment there. I walked in at Channel 2 at 1. They hired me at 3 and put me on the air at 6 o'clock.
I read that about that. I was going to say that.
Yeah. So
as a sportscast, right out of the gate.
Persistence.
Yes. Well, that's one thing I read about.
100% of it is show up.
Right.
Be there.
Right. I read that about you. Like, that was very interesting on how that
same way I got my job here, by the way.
Transpired. So how long were you there?
3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you wanted to get out, or did you just? Well, how did it work coming down this way?
Charleston is at the time was the 128th market.
Okay.
And it's still probably not as much as it was. It's a city of the haves and the have-nots. Mm-hmm. It was definitely part of the have-nots. My first job, I was making $10,000 a year.
Okay.
Which by the week at the time is $135 a week take home. So that, in fact, after the first year, I said to him, I love this job and I want to stay here. I'm not making enough money. I'm going to have to start bartending on the weekends because I know how to do that. And they were like, no, we'll give you a raise.
Right.
So after a couple of years, I started kind of maybe getting restless a little bit, wanted to and the thing in that business was about getting into a larger market. And, the job actually was at the time, Broadcasting Magazine was the place that everybody went to in my business.
Okay.
Every week, came out every week. And the job was in the help wanted in the back. There were 200 jobs listed. And so, I made a tape, got in my car, and drove down here on a Sunday night, spent the night in the Ramada Inn on University. Mm-hmm. And I was waiting for the news director when he came in at 8 o'clock on Monday morning.
Was sports as big a part of the news back then as it is now?
Locally, yes.
Okay.
Bigger, actually.
Really?
When I first started, I got 6 minutes.
Okay.
My last sportscast that I did, I got 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Yeah. So it was a much bigger part of it. But then again, the personalities on the air were a much bigger part of it because the business was being run locally by the people in town. Now the business is run by consultants. So if you look at, for instance, Channel 4 in Jacksonville, if you go to Orlando and look at Channel 6, they look exactly the same. Well, they're owned by the same people. The consultants are giving them the same thing, Channel 4 in Detroit, same exact thing.
Interesting.
So when it was being run by the local people in town, they were able to kind of understand what was important to people in that town. In Jacksonville, Florida, when I first started here, sports was a big part of people's lives.
And what was so important?
And I had to explain to my boss, who's the news director, by the way, many times, they would say, I need 15 credentials to Florida, Georgia. And I would say, can you give me 15 credentials to the Republican National Convention? Well, of course not. I said, well, it's the same thing. And he would say, it's just an effing football game.
Right.
And I'd say, this is where you're missing it. It's a cultural weekend where they happen to play a football game.
Right, that's funny.
It's like TPC. It's a cultural week in town. They happen to have a golf tournament.
Right, that's funny.
So
I imagine the top news in there probably was Gator football back then.
We covered Florida State, Miami, and Georgia as if they were our hometown teams.
Interesting.
Because think about it, after a while, it was Bobby Bowden, Steve Spurrier, Vince Dooley, and Howard Snellenberger. Mm-hmm. I mean, all 4 of those guys are in the Hall of Fame.
Right.
So, you're talking about, massive amounts of news coming out of all those places all the time.
Right.
So I know I-10 between here and Tallahassee pretty well.
I would imagine. Is football your favorite to cover?
My favorite stories, or the favorite thing I ever did in my career, was the back-to-back national championships that the Florida basketball team won.
Interesting.
And the reason is...
You see a little deja vu now?
Well, it was really fun to watch that this year.
Yeah.
But when you're a reporter on that and you're covering them like it's the hometown team, there's only 12 guys on the team. And then there's 4 assistants. And when you're there all the time for home games, you go on the road with them, then you go to the SEC tournament, you go to the NCAAs, you're in the locker room, they get to know you, you get a relationship with them.
Right.
My best relationship with that team was Chris Richard, who was kind of the ultimate sixth man.
Right.
But I got to know Joakim Noah and Al Horford and, all the different guys on the team. I'd walk in, they'd say, "Hi, Sam." I mean, I earned their trust. Mm-hmm. The photographer that I took with me made friends with them as well because, you just spent a lot of time with these guys.
Sure.
And then, of course, I just thought Billy Donovan was one of the best people and certainly one of the best coaches I've ever been around. His ability to get the best out of guys at that age was kind of amazing. So I really enjoyed covering that because I got to know those guys. And in fact, there's video of me and Billy walking out of the Georgia Dome at about 2:00 in the morning, and I say to Billy, "That's the most impressive thing I've ever seen." And he looks at me and he goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "It's one thing to say you're coming back to do it. It's a whole other thing to come back and do it." And you think about how many teams have tried that.
100%, and to rally the people to come back and do it too. I mean, that's pretty amazing. That was before. Money and all this other stuff that goes on now.
Yeah, those guys.
Amazing.
And that,
And didn't they go to like the Final Four again? Wasn't it? I feel like they went to the far, like either the after the second win or before the first win.
Yeah, I mean, they were perennial, contenders.
Right.
I mean, remember, they went to the Final Four in 2000.
And that's really the first time the Gators were really on the basketball scene in a big way, right?
Well, if you go back to the 90s, had some pretty good teams with Dwayne Shinsis and people like that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, Billy really put him on the map, and that's why they named the court after him, and they should have. Yeah, absolutely. He's one of the finest people and one of the finest coaches I've ever been around.
Until last year, they would have liked to have him back, but now I think the new coach is taking over that.
Yeah.
What
done well.
I wrote down some of the awards that you've had. It's pretty impressive. Master's Major Achievement Award, Emmy Award winner. I don't meet many Emmy Award winners. That's pretty nice. You have a big trophy?
I gave the trophy to the producer.
Okay, all right.
I have a little certificate.
What did you get an Emmy for? Like, was it a specific thing you covered, or how did that work?
In my business, I really think just getting nominated is the best part. Winning is almost arbitrary because I've been on the Emmy selection committee, and you watch 5 nominees and you go, I mean, they all should win, but you got to pick one.
Right.
So just getting a nomination is great. We used to do a lot of special reports and stuff. And one of the first Emmy I won was we did an hour-long show. Jacksonville used to have a thing, and I think we should do this again, called River Day, where they celebrated the river all around the Gate River Run. And there were all kinds of things, the festivals going on, and music, and obviously the run in the morning, the race, the national championship. There were food trucks. It was a whole thing. And so we did an hour-long show that night from 8 to 9, I think. It was live, and we ended up winning an Emmy for that. That was
really
the first
cool.
one.
So that didn't really have anything to do with sports.
Yeah, it was more cultural. And, my job became, a lot different than that. And for 7 consecutive years, and you may not be old enough, and of course you're not old enough at all, but when I say I was Tom Wills's Joan Rivers, most people don't know what that means anymore. But when Johnny Carson took off for the last 10 years of his career, Joan Rivers was his permanent replacement. They didn't have a rotating list until Letterman and all those people. And so whenever Tom took off for 7 years, I anchored the news.
Oh, really? That's right. I remember.
Which was really, kind of fascinating to me. I didn't have a lot of interest in it, but then I started to recognize how much impact you could have from that chair. And by the way, my wife said, geez, the lighting there makes you look like a movie star. You're like over here in the garage doing the sports, and you sit in
who's
Tom's,
that guy?
you let sit in Tom's chair. It's like, whoa, look at that.
You guys had a long run, man. I mean,
well, Tom and George and Deborah and I are the longest running 4-person anchor team in the history of television.
Wow.
And we were together 22 years, 23 years. Yeah.
And you got to believe that's never going to happen again.
Well, it won't, just because it's a rotating business, and the business itself has changed so dramatically.
Right.
So.
Associated Press Broadcast Award, Sportscaster of the Year, and Bob Hayes Hall of Fame. What Sportscaster of the Year, was that all across the country?
I think it was Florida.
Okay.
But I won that a bunch. But
and Bob Hayes being
Bob Hayes.
Yes.
And it's an important track meet for high school athletes who come here to compete, and I knew Bob pretty well, and I was so honored when they put me in their Hall of Fame, because we covered that pretty extensively, and I'm not so sure, and I'm on the Pro Football Hall of Fame committee still, and up until they put him in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, I don't think Bob got the recognition that he probably deserved. He really struggled at the end of his life with a lot of addiction problems, but really was an unbelievable athlete who changed the game of professional football. And for the longest time, was the only guy to ever win a gold medal and a Super Bowl ring.
Wow.
And if you watch the video of him winning the gold medal, you have to kind of look at the video to figure out where he is, because he's over there in lane 1. They thought, the guys in lane 4 and 5 are going to win the race. Bob just took off on a cinder track, by the way, took off and ended up winning the gold medal.
You mentioned high school sports. Was that when you first started? Is high school sports always been big to cover? I feel like it is now.
I like to think that we helped expand that. I thought it was an important part of what we did, and we created the first Friday night highlight show, we did a full half hour, and it was more of a logistics success than anything else. Getting out and getting 22. Now there's 52 high schools that are people that can watch the local television station. So it's hard to do them all. But you get out to cover 22 different games, and to get at the time the tapes put in the machine right for the director to cooperate, for the on-air talent at that time was me, to be able to kind of listen and coordinate and talk to the producer and all that stuff. It was more of a logistical success than anything else, but it did raise the level. And then I did they wanted me to do an athlete of the week for a long time. And I told them, I said, all that does is kind of make one school happy and 48 other schools unhappy. I said, it should be more than that. So we came out with this, scholar, athlete, community service kind of thing. And you had to be nominated by either your athletic director, your coach, your parent, or one of the administrators in your school. And I got to talk to so many wonderfully motivated people, young people who really were looking for some direction on how to be successful. And that was a 12-week buy. By the way, ViStar bought that for 12 weeks.
Interesting.
And when they got rid of me, it had been going on for, I want to say, 15 years.
Wow.
It was.
I would think high school sports would be really kind of rewarding to cover. It's not so business.
It is, particularly when you're talking with kids who have tremendous talent. They're using it, but then they also understand the importance of the discipline in the classroom and giving back to the community at the same time. And that's what impressed me so many times about talking to young kids. I mean, I was doing that so long that I used to ask them, "Do you text?" Right? That was one of the standard questions for about a year. Do you text? And a lot of them would say no, and then ones would say yes, and I would say, "Well, do you think that that's affecting people's ability to do this?" And at first, the answer was, "Of course not." And at the end, the answer was absolutely.
Right.
I'll be sitting next to somebody in class, and rather than say, they'll text me, across the room or whatever. So, you could see the cultural shift as that happened.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had down here, what are the most memorable sports events? You talked about the Gators back-to-back on basketball. What are some other ones that come in your mind? You've seen so many there. I'm curious. What comes to your mind right off the bat?
1983, Jacksonville at the time was really vying to try to get themselves on the map. Jake Godbold had done a survey, and a majority of people, more than 70% of the people who lived in North Florida, according to the survey, didn't like living here. Right?
Wow.
They didn't like it. All right. Now, again,
it's hard to imagine.
Well, if you go back,
yeah,
right, there were 2 paper mills, chemical plant, so the place smelled on a regular basis, particularly when the wind blew out of the west or the north. There were tolls, both on 95 and on JTB. There were just a lot of things that were holding it back. And so Jake decided that, we need to get rid of the smell. I mean, Jacksonville used to be known as the city that stinks, right? And so we being Channel 4, did numerous specials called The Smell of Money, and won Peabody's and won Murrow Awards and all kinds of for that. But it helped accelerate the paper mills either fixing the smell or moving out of town or closing completely. Then we got on board with then Mayor Tommy Hazouri to help get rid of the tolls. I mean, you think about it, in the last 30 years, the citizenry of Jacksonville, Duval County, has twice voted to tax themselves. And that never happens.
Right.
Once to get rid of tolls and once for the Better Jacksonville plan. So, I mean, that never happens.
Right.
So part of it is that the drive that Channel 4 decided to get on board with that. Well, Jake Godbold said that he thought that the thing to get people together would be to get a professional football team. So,
see where you're going now.
So we're doing everything we can to host a Super Bowl. We've got a stadium at the time that seemed to be just fine, and it only hosted, Georgia, Florida, Georgia, and the Gator Bowl every year. So we're flying all over the country, and we're going with them, making presentations to the owners. 1983, we get into the finals. I go to Washington. We're staying at L'Enfant Plaza. And I'm standing there, and the Jacksonville contingent, it's their turn to go in. And they walk in, and Jake's the last guy in line. And had terrible back problems, so he kind of walked like that. And as he walked by, he grabbed me by the lapel and dragged me into the room with him. right? I'm convinced he just wanted another guy in a coat and tie from Jacksonville standing in the room. But we go in the room, and it's pretty impressive. At the time, there's 28 teams, and it's owners and general managers, and that's it. So there's 56 at the time guys there.
Just staring you down.
And they're there. Hugh Culverhouse has got his boots on, and he's from here, but he owns the Bucks. He's got his feet up on the table, and he's smoking a cigar, right? And I mean, it's just a what? And I realized about 10 seconds into it, I was like, oh, this is a fraternity meeting.
Right.
That's all this is, right? This is a frat meeting.
Right.
Right. And there's 5 guys from the NFL up front. Pete Rozell's, the commissioner at the time. Mm-hmm. Don Weiss, who moved here, wonderful guy, was one of the right-hand men there. Jim Steig was there. It's before Roger Goodell got involved. So they make the presentation, and, and Culverhouse speaks, and several other owners spoke in favor of Jacksonville, and it was very nice.
Is this to get the Super Bowl, or I'm forgetting my time, or to get the team?
Super Bowl.
Okay, Super Bowl before the team.
We're going to host a Super Bowl, according to Jake Godbolt.
Interesting, because that would be unheard of now.
Unheard of.
Right.
Right. But, we kept making the finals, but obviously in the back of his mind, Jake is also laying the groundwork for Jacksonville to be a known quantity, and it really did work, by the way. So we finished the presentation, we go up, and I'm sitting in the lobby with Jake, and next to me is his chief of staff, Don, and Jake is sitting across from me, and we're sitting closer than this, and there's a table here. And Billy Sullivan, who owned the Patriots at the time, walks by, young guy, stops, leans over to Jake and says, hey, Jake, you're not going to get the Super Bowl, but are you interested in hosting a Michael Jackson concert? And Jake looks at me and goes, Michael Jackson. And I go, yeah. The guy with the hair and wears the glove? He goes, what? I go, he goes, the kid from Jackson 5? And I said, he's not a kid anymore. I said, just say yes. And he goes, yeah. He goes, well, come on. So the 3 of us get up, and we go with Billy and his assistant. We walk up to the first floor, and we walk down to Billy Sullivan's suite. We get to the door. He goes in. He looks at me and Don and says, would you guys mind waiting out here? Sure. So we're cooling our heels out in the hallway. Jake's in there talking. 15 minutes later, door opens. Jake says to me, we're going to host the opening of the Michael Jackson tour.
Victory tour. I feel like that was what it was.
I went.
I did too. I feel like I did.
No kidding. He goes, yeah. And he says, so now Billy Sullivan's in front of us. We're all walking down the hallway. Jake says to me, he goes, he offered us the first 3 dates, but I told him we just wanted one. I said, you tell him we want all 3. And he goes, hey, Billy, can we get all 3? Sullivan never turned around. He goes, yeah, you got it. That was the end of it.
We'll get back to the story in just a second, but while you're listening, here's something you should know if you live in Northeast Florida. If you're self-employed and trying to buy a home, it's not as hard as you might think. We work with business owners, freelancers, and creatives every single day. People who don't fit the traditional housing mold, and we're here to let you know that we have a real loan programs that make homeownership possible. We've helped tons of local business owners and creatives get approved using flexible loan options that work for them and their business. First Coast Mortgage Funding is proud to sponsor Hometown Jax right here in Jacksonville.
I go to the house phone, no cell phones, obviously, call Tom Wills. I said, hey, Tom, we're not getting the Super Bowl. I said, but we're going to host the first 3 nights of Michael Jackson's tour. And Tom goes, I never forget it, he goes, we have a new lead. So, those are the kind of things that happen when you develop relationships. But again, even though that's not really a sports-related kind of thing,
so that set the stage for the Super Bowl eventually.
Well, actually, it set the stage for us to get a USFL team.
Okay.
Is what happened. Fred Bullard shows up here. Jake calls me on the phone and says, I got a guy here who says he's going to bring a football team here. And at the time, we had been jerked around by John Meekum from the Saints and Bill Bidwell from the Cardinals and, of course, Robert Irsay from the Colts and even
moving here.
Moving here. And so he puts Fred on the phone, and I'm so insolent. I'm surprised Fred still speaks to me to this day, but I was just terrible.
Was there
to him.
any ever concern that Jacksonville could support it, or you were convinced that it would support
I thought people would show up to see the opposition for the first 10 years.
Right.
And, you see a lot of that. But, Jacksonville was easily the best USFL city. And, of course, they sued the league and won because they were trying to force their way. Donald Trump, in fact, was trying to help force his way into the league, into the NFL. And they won, but, they won $1 that was trebled to $3. But
right.
It did lay the groundwork for Jacksonville getting in the minds of people, in the football world.
Yeah. Well, I'm assuming, you've been to multiple Super Bowls. Is there one that sticks out?
Everybody should go to one.
Yeah.
Right. If you go to one, you don't have to go to another.
It's kind of, yeah.
But everybody should go to one. It's like I tell everybody should go to one Daytona 500.
Right.
Because it's a spectacle like you've never seen before. The first Super Bowl I attended in 1984 was in Tampa. And it was really an impressive game. The Raiders beat the Redskins at the time. And Jack Squirek intercepted Joe Theismann. And Marcus Allen had what at the time was the longest run in Super Bowl history.
So have you, just going down the list, have you been to a World Series finals or?
Many.
U.S. Opens?
Yes.
Masters?
45.
Is there any major event that you have you been to British Open?
I have.
Okay. I'm just trying to think of anything else.
When I covered the Olympics in Torino in 2006 in Italy, that was the one thing that I wanted to do as a journalist was, I'd covered the Atlanta Olympics when they were there, but always wanted to cover a Winter Olympics in Europe. And when I went to that, I was like, okay, I can't think of anything. I've covered the Tour de France. And I just had the best job that you could probably
wow,
have. I got to go. I got to go to all of these things, and I don't have a lot of regrets. One of them might have been that I didn't recognize how special that was because it was just my job at the time, and I could have probably brought some people along with me more often to let them experience it. Standing on the sidelines of an NFL game is like second nature, but when you're somebody who's never done it. Oh, yeah. That's a very memorable thing, and I should have probably done that in so many other events when I could have. And what I was trying to do was not act like I was anything special, but I should have recognized that it was a special thing that I was doing with a lot of people.
Well, that's pretty incredible. That's a pretty cool job when that's the trips you're.
But the things that stick in your head,
your meals and expenses. Like I'm going to the Super Bowl, the World Series. I was like, yeah, whatever.
I was in Philadelphia in '83, and I grew up in Baltimore. And when the Orioles won the World Series, there's nothing better than seeing your team win it.
Right. Amazing.
That was kind of fun.
What? Did you have any role models as sportscasters growing up?
Over the years, I was helped by a guy in D.C. for a little bit called Glenn Brenner, who was really nice to me, good guy to me. And again, I was the bartender, and he realized that I was serious about doing this, so he helped me out. And then when I came here, I got to be friends with Pat Summerall. I was pretty close with Pat, and Tony Trabert probably was one of my best friends. And, Tony really helped mentor me in a lot of situations like that. But, as a local sportscaster, you really have to develop who you are and the relationships in your town. And you have to be loyal to your town and loyal to the people who are watching. Mm-hmm. And you can't constantly be thought of as the guy who's got one foot out the door with his bag packed because he's going to go somewhere else. And the only thing I ever asked at Channel 4 in the early 90s, CBS, we were the CBS affiliate, and I asked the general manager when I had signed a new contract, I said, the only thing I'd really like to do, I'd like to do about 10 or 12 events for CBS. And at the time, CBS had the Winter Olympics, both in Cortina, I think they were at Lillehammer and Cortina. And of course, that never came to pass because she didn't do anything about it. But that was the one thing. I didn't want to bounce around. I wanted to raise my family here. You know, why did I stay here? Because my wife liked it here.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like most guys, you know. And
So you didn't have an itch to scratch to get in a bigger market.
it was I worked for, at the time, Catherine Graham owned the Washington Post, and we were owned by the Washington Post. And Catherine Graham had a real commitment to journalism and news, and had the whole organization set up that way. There was a guy who oversaw, from the corporate standpoint, who oversaw all the news departments. So it was a very different time in the business. And they offered me a job in Miami because they owned a station in Miami. And, my wife and I decided we'd rather raise our children here than raise them in Miami.
Right.
They had a station in Houston that they talked to me about. But it was the same kind of job, only a bigger market.
Right.
Now, maybe it would have been a launching pad for something else if I'd gone to a bigger market. But I was happy with the job that we were doing, because we were the dominant station here. It wasn't like they weren't letting me go cover stuff.
Right. Sounds like it.
It was an uphill. I was swimming upstream mostly, but it was a big part
Pretty
of.
cool to be in a town and see the evolution of an NFL team. That's pretty cool. How special is that? People don't get to do that.
I was in Chicago for that, and got created a relationship with Wayne Weaver, and trusted me enough to drag me along in a lot of non-media situations, let's put it that way. And when it got down, when they went back there for the second time, people forget that they originally went in October, and
you're talking about trying out for the team. Is that
when they were going to award teams?
Okay.
And there were five finalists.
Who were the finalists?
It was Baltimore. There were two ownership groups from Baltimore, Memphis, Charlotte, and St. Louis, and us, right? And Charlotte got a team, and the NFL delayed the decision on the second team for 30 days. Oh. Well, everybody knew that they were trying to get St. Louis to get their act together because we want to give you the team. Oh. And ask the current president of the Jaguars, Mark Lamping, who was part of the St. Louis delegation. He knew what was going on there, and they had a lot of infighting in St. Louis about who was going to run this. Jacksonville was coalesced around Wayne Weaver, and we only got a team because of Wayne Weaver. The other owners liked him, and so I was in Chicago for the second meeting, and they go, okay, go up. The Chicago Hyatt has two buildings. One of them's the Towers. They sent us all over to the Towers, and I went with Wayne, and up to the 25th floor, and they gave each one of the remaining 5 a separate suite. And so I went up, and I went in to the room. Tom Petway was there, and David Selden, and Wayne, and Dolores, and all the decision makers were there. Sandy MacArthur, everybody was there. Preston Haskell, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm listening to the conversation about how it's going and so forth. And the security guard comes in and says, all right, all media has to leave. Well, the plans for the new stadium were in front of me, so I picked them up and put them in front of my face. And Tom Petway just looked at me and laughed. And Gene Fournette, who just retired from the Times-Union, I heard him as they shoved him out the door going, but Kouvaris is still in there. I didn't say anything. So I stood there and just, waited around. And, 30 minutes later, the door opens, and Ronnie Weaver, Wayne's brother, bursts through the door, and he is red-faced. And I'm standing there, Dolores, David Selden, Wayne, and Ronnie. And he looks at him and he says, Wayne, you're getting a football team.
Wow.
And I spoke out of turn. I said, how do you know that? And he goes, I just ran into the chairman of the finance committee who has approved Jacksonville, and they're going to present that to the full ownership, and that's never been turned down in the history of the league.
Wow. So you were there
I'm standing
first
there,
moment.
right. And Selden, I looked at Selden, and I said, I should go. And he said, yep. And I said, okay. So I went over and picked up my cell phone, which was one of those bricks, looked like a World War II thing, literally with an antenna on it.
Yeah.
And I stuck it up against the window, and I dialed my news director's number, and her direct number, and she answered. And I said, Nancy? She goes, yeah. I go, tangerine. What?
Code word?
Tangerine. Okay. And I hung up, and I left. And not one of my finer moments. I go down to the elevator block. There's 2 elevators. And the producer from Channel 12, they're our competition, steps out. Nice young woman. She says to me, hey, Sam. I said, hey, how are you? Where are they? I said, they're down the hall there, knowing full well that the guards weren't going to let her in. And the other elevator opened up, and I hit every floor on this elevator, and then got in mine and hit 2 and 1. And when it got to 2, I hit every number. So I knew I had maybe 10 minutes on her before the elevators eventually
Tricks
got
of the
back
trade.
up there. And I went down, and as I walked by, and Tom Wills tells the story better than I do, as I walked by the amphitheater, there was a door that was open, and I just stuck my head in because I knew that's where they kept all the T-shirts and the hats, and all the other ones were there. Memphis Showboats, Baltimore Bombers, they were all still there. All the Jacksonville stuff was gone.
Wow.
And so I went and I said to Tom, we went live on the air, and I said, we're getting a football team.
How do you know, though, at that moment that you're allowed to report that based on the whole trust thing and all of that?
That was
just the way it just did.
I was reporting that one.
Yeah.
Okay. If they didn't like it, that's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah,
But I
you
was
just
going to
go out
report
on
that
a limb.
one. Yeah.
So you mentioned you're still a Pro Football Hall of Fame voter.
Yeah, because, if you think about it, you don't get eligible for the Hall of Fame until 5 years after you retire. So the guys that we're talking about now, I saw them play. Fred Taylor, for instance. I saw every game Fred Taylor played. So, I'm still on the committee, and maybe it's getting close for me to retire from the committee. But every player that we talk about, Larry Fitzgerald, you name it, I saw that. That's who I covered. So it's not.
Do you get asked to be on the
unusual.
committee?
You do, and
do you get asked? Is it a term or?
Well, Wayne Weaver asked me to be on the committee, and I said to him, Wayne, I appreciate that, but I know that most of the guys on the committee are the beat writers. So if you want to put the beat writer on the committee, and you and I will always know you asked me first, I'm fine with that. He started laughing. He said, you don't think I already thought about that? And I said, be careful what you wish for. He goes, why? I said, because, it's like a Supreme Court appointment. Once you put me on, you can't get rid of me.
Right.
The Hall of Fame can get rid of me, but the Jaguars, I'm sure that if Shad Khan went to the Hall of Fame.
And how many years have you been doing that?
This was my 31st.
And are your votes private? Or
Yeah, I don't think they should be, but they are.
They are private.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But it was my job to present Tony Baselli to the committee, and after 6 years.
So, what you mean you were his advocate? You were the one trying to lay the case.
That's the right word, but you're not supposed to be the advocate. You're just supposed to lay his case out. But I have a relation with Tony.
Right.
I like Tony. I want him to get in.
Right.
So I'm trying to convince the other members, and the process is so hard. And I get everybody who's on the committee gets roundly criticized about that, and we all laugh because that just shows that people don't understand the process.
Well,
And the process is very hard. Last year they made it even harder, and I'm very happy that Tony got in. Once Terrell Davis, who really only had 3 big years in the league, and got in, it really showed that the length of your career shouldn't be that much of an impediment. And Tony played 97 games in the league. I mean, there's an iconic name like Paul Hornung, played 105 games in the league.
wow.
So there are a lot of things.
So you were also a Heisman Trophy voter.
I am
Still?
since 1978.
Wow.
My ballot followed me. My master's credential and my Heisman ballot followed me from Charleston here for some reason.
Okay, well, I have 2 questions there. What's more exciting, the Heisman or the Hall of Fame for a pro to vote on?
Well, the Heisman is such a cut and dried process. 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
All you do
So
is you
it's
vote.
easier to make a decision then, or it's
Who's the
not?
best player? Last year was Travis Hunter. I mean,
Right.
that was easy.
Yeah.
Who's second? Who cares? But the system can be gamed. You know, the year Tim Tebow won it as a sophomore, the next year, Tim was the best player in America the next year, right? All 8 voters from Oklahoma did not put him on their ballot anywhere, right? So he got 0 points out of the state of Oklahoma. Sam Bradford won the Heisman. Tim got more first-place votes than Bradford, but he didn't get more points because these guys all left him off. They gamed the system. Interesting. Right? So that's the one thing you can't do in the pro football. It's a long process where we're asked virtually to cut the list of eligibles down from about 125 to eventually 25 to 15. Wow. And then we spend a whole day talking about those 15 players, plus the senior candidates, plus the contributors, and plus the coaches. Wow. That's a long day, certainly worth it. But you know, when you get it down to 15 modern era players, I can usually eliminate. We vote from 15 to 10. I can usually eliminate it down to 10, saying these guys, I think they're going to get in, but these 10 guys, from 10 to 5, I know I'm eliminating 5 guys who are Hall of Famers.
And I'm assuming you've been to a lot of ceremonies for either one.
Yeah, and it's life-changing for them. And people say, well, how so? Well, from a tangible standpoint, you put HOF behind your autograph, it's worth a lot more money.
Right.
You know, you're the guest speaker for First Coast Mortgage Funding, and you're the Hall of Famer. It's a $25,000 gig. It's not a $5,000 gig. You know.
And you said something too, master's credentials. What does that mean? Like you have a pass to get in whenever you want?
Well, they invite you.
Uh-huh.
And it's kind of like their television contract with CBS. It's a yearly thing.
Wow.
And I've been lucky to I've been invited for 47 consecutive years.
Man.
I missed the 1982 Masters because my oldest daughter was born that weekend.
Right.
And
you couldn't make it Sunday at least, or
you know, my wife isn't too happy about the fact that me and Dickie Myers, who delivered all 3 of my kids at Baptist, sat there and brought a small black and white in.
That's funny.
To the labor, not in the delivery room, but the labor room.
Are there any athletes that really stand out? And what I mean is, like, man, that guy really had everything. He was just a great individual, a great athlete. I mean, are there names that just pop in your head?
Well,
or did you just?
There's only 2 guys that I would have introduced to either one of my daughters.
Well, okay, that's a great way to introduce it right there.
Right, Paul Posluszny.
Okay.
And Adam Scott. All right.
Okay. Interesting 2 names.
Two of the guys, both phenomenal players as well. But in terms of just watching athletes, the 2 athletes that I watched who exceeded expectations are LeBron James and Tiger Woods. I mean, when I went down to Disney to cover Tiger when he first came on tour, literally, like it was like his first or second tournament, and at the time people were like, "Yeah, wait till he gets with the big boys, wait till you see, wait till he sees how to play the game, wait till he tries to figure out how to travel every week and all the different things that it takes to be a professional player." Well, I went down there. And I mean, you're standing on the tee, and guys are hitting it, and guys are hitting it, and guys are hitting it, and then Tiger hits it, and it's up here, and it's forever, and you're like, "Wait, that's different." It's kind of like the first time you saw John Elway throw a football.
Right.
Everybody throws it. It's here, it's here, it's here, and then Elway, it's, it's there, and you're like, "Well, that's different."
Right.
So, and then Tiger, of course, came out with a lot of hype and exceeded it. He was better than advertised. And obviously was able to compartmentalize his golfing life with the rest of his, his personality.
Pretty unbelievable in itself.
Yeah, and the way he was able to do that.
So immediately seeing Tiger, you're like, we haven't seen anything like this in a long time.
Right. And then I went down. We used to. People don't remember when the Magic became a team. What, 95? I think 20% of their season ticket holders were from Jacksonville.
Interesting.
Because it was a 2-hour drive down there. So we used to cover them all the time. I
feel like that's like a term used a lot. But do you feel like there's several like athletes that come to your mind and like, we haven't seen that yet? That's new.
LeBron.
Like LeBron and Tiger.
Okay.
And
then when you see Michael Jordan play in person, he's he's operating in slow motion, and everybody else is running around like a water bug.
Right.
I mean, it's like, oh yeah, okay, now I get it. And you can't see that on TV, but when you're watching it in person, you're like, holy smokes,
Right.
That's very different. And by the way, Michael Jordan really, I felt like at the time, set the standard for not only how to act and how to play, but I mean, his dealings with the media, Michael was unbelievably fabulous. I mean, he'd stand in the back of the line, he'd get fully dressed, he'd have his thing over his shoulder, and we'd stand there and we'd ask every question. And at the end, he would say, "You got what you need, everybody?" And he goes, "Because I got to leave, because I got to walk out the back door, because as you know, I can't walk out the front door." And we'd laugh, right?
Yeah.
"Thanks, Mike. We'll see you." And I mean, even when he was here playing baseball, he was very accommodating. And
do you see some common traits and athletes that just seem to go to the next level?
they're not looking at the scoreboard.
Interesting.
They are. And I see Amelia over there nodding, having been a competitive college. The common thread between all of the great athletes that I've seen that I tried to adopt in my parenting, helping my kids in their athletic careers, and certainly in my professional career, was I'm going to try to be the best I can be. I want to find out how good I can be. How can I get better today? The answer is yes, every day, by the way. And, people now these days talk about the 1% better or the 2% better. Mm-hmm. But I want to find out how much better I can be. And I saw that from a rhythmic gymnastic person who was 6 to a 20-year NFL grizzled veteran. They were still trying to figure out how they could be better. And they weren't, we're down by 6 or we're up by 2 or what. No, they were focused on how much better can I be?
The process, not the result.
You could say Nick Saban made that very popular, but
right.
But I guess that's probably the best way to say it, is that they were interested in making themselves better, playing as well as they possibly could, and at the end of the game, look up. And if you did that, and if everybody on your team did that, there's no question you won.
Yeah, right.
Right.
So you had I remember this clearly, a popular segment called Stump Sam, where people would come on the air and try to beat you with a trivia question you couldn't answer. Did you get stumped much or ever?
I answered about 90% of the questions correct. And people go, how do you do that? Well, if you asked a plumber a plumbing question every day, they'd know the answer, right?
Yes.
Is it a half inch or is it an elbow? They'd know. Uh-huh. We wouldn't know, but they'd know. I was in sports every day, all the time.
Yes.
And I still remember the first question Tom Wills asked me, and I remember the absolute easiest question he ever asked me that I totally blanked on to this day. And they asked me over 2,000 questions over that time.
Wow, a 90% success rate.
And
and
I tell people, and people who watch that were like, were you cheating? Of course, you couldn't do that now because of Google, right? And I would say, I was looking into a camera, which was a fixed camera. I said, and where the seat was to the left, when I would look away to the left, 95 goes by the station. So I was kind of looking at the traffic because I was trying to get, as you probably know, everybody knows this, plays any kind of trivia, the hardest answer to get out of your head is the one that came in your head that is wrong, right?
Right.
So I'm looking over here trying to get that out. When I would look this way, I was just kind of distracting myself because the weather department was over there, and they didn't know anything.
Yeah, it's the weather. Come on.
But when I went like this, that's where the sports department was. I was like, I need help, right? But, just a lot of stupid, useless stuff that was stored in my head at the time that luckily came out. Yeah. But I can tell you that segment really honed my deductive reasoning process. In fact, the first question Tom Wills ever asked me was April 7th, 1969, the Montreal Expos hosted the first Major League Baseball game ever outside the continental United States during the regular season. Who did they play? Right? All right, so it seems like a jumbled question, right? Well, if you're a sports fan and if you're in it every day, the Expos played in the National League. That eliminates half the teams. They played at the time there were only 2 divisions. They played in the National League East. All right. So that eliminates, another 6 teams. And they played an unbalanced schedule. So you knew that they were going to probably going to play somebody from the East. So now I'm thinking about, all right, now and I got it down to, and I said this live, and I said, they either played the Mets or the Cardinals. The Mets, major market team, wanted to create some excitement, or the Cardinals, traditional, really well-known nationally as national. And Tom looked at me on the air and said, well, I said, come on, I got it from 30 to 2.
Yeah.
And he goes, you got to pick, right? I said, all right, the Cardinals. And he goes, yeah, they played the New York Mets that day. So I opened with the wrong answer. So
That's funny. And you run a website, kind of journalism, same as sportsline.com. Evidently you're a pilot too. Like, when did you have time to become a pilot?
I was determined to become a pilot before I was 50. So I really concentrated on that. That's a hard thing to do, by the way.
Well,
Why? Because then I became multi-engine and instrument rated. So, I wanted to make sure that if I was going to do this, I did it right. And it's a focus, but something I always wanted to do. I mean, one of my fondest memories is being I was at a U.S. Navy banquet in Pensacola when they were opening up a new hangar over there, and sitting at the next table was Gene Cernan, who's the last man to walk on the moon.
Wow.
And at the end of the night, I walked over, and I was wearing my wings, and he asked me what I flew, and we were talking about that. And I leaned over to him and I said, I've wanted to be an astronaut since I was 6 years old. And he leaned over to me and goes, I'm 80. Me too. And so that was pretty cool.
I did have down that you wanted to be an astronaut.
Yeah.
It's funny when you really ask. There, a lot of people wanted to be an astronaut. It's kind of interesting that
well, in my age
probably
group,
inspired a lot of people.
And that in my age group, that was the ultimate.
Right.
And and in fact, my senior year of high school, my junior year, I took advanced trigonometry so that I would have the math background. Then I took calculus. My freshman year at Clemson, I took advanced calculus.
Oof,
right?
It seems difficult.
It was ridiculous. I was nothing but a math nerd at the time.
Uh-huh.
And then just kind of, as I had said earlier, found what I really wanted to do. But back in my mind, I always wanted to get my pilot's license.
But you've flown with the Blue Angels. You've been in a plane with them. Is that right?
I have 10 hours in the FA-18. That's the plane that the Blue Angels fly. And I've also flown with the Thunderbirds.
Twice on aircraft carriers you landed.
Three
now,
times.
I imagine that's got to be the most unbelievable thing ever.
It's pretty cool.
Terrifying and cool at the same time.
The landing is when you land on a carrier. I did it on a Bluebird day. It's no pitching deck, not flat. Go down there and land basically. But the takeoff is kind of funny. I mean, I'm sitting in the back seat. It's a 2-seater, and the pilot's in front of me, and I'm above him. And by the way, I'm kind of long-waisted, so you think that those guys are sitting in there, and they're down here. The rails are down here. Mm-hmm. You feel like you're just totally exposed.
You feel like you're
everywhere,
not fully secure
in
the plane.
I had to go through 6 weeks of training for them to authorize me to do this.
Wow.
And they try to drown me, and all the stuff that they do, and it was great. And so I'm there, and they bring us up, and they put us under tension, and the guy in front of me, Brillo, my call sign is Bone. He goes, Bone. He goes, we're ready to go. That guy over there, you see that guy over there with his finger up in the air? I said, yeah. He goes, he's waiting for you to salute him. I said, really? He goes, I've already saluted him. And of course, he's holding the rails like this because it's a no hands takeoff. And he's holding the rails, and he goes, and once you salute him, get your head back and grab the rails because we're gone. And I said, okay. And so I looked over, and sure enough, the guy looks right at me, and I go, and he goes like that, and he goes like this, And the guy on the deck that you always see, the guy goes like, he kneels down and he goes,
like in the
goes
movies.
like, you see the guy do that, and this guy goes like this and presses the button, and you go down the rails, and you go from 0 to 125 in less than 300 feet. And from the outside, it looks very smooth. I can tell you, if you've ever ridden your bike on like a cobbled street where your eyes can't keep up with it, that's what it's like. Wow. In fact, I'm thinking something's gone terribly wrong.
Right.
We're going to die.
Because the ship isn't stopping. The ship keeps moving.
And so I'm reaching for the eject. I'm waiting for him to say,
oh my gosh. Don't accidentally pull that.
We get off the end of the deck, and it goes totally silent. The first thing you see is the water come up, and you're like, oh, something's gone terribly wrong.
Yes.
We're going to die. Right. And like you said, because the ship's not stopping. But you see the it goes off the end of the deck, and it settles a little bit, and then put it in burner and take off.
How close do you think it gets to the water?
I don't know. 100, I don't know, 150 feet.
So you play music on the side, so you play instruments, you're in a band. When everybody pays that high fee of yours, you'll come out and do some music, right?
Been playing the trumpet since I was in the 4th grade.
Wow.
And in college, I bought a guitar for $50 and an 8-track player.
Okay.
And taught myself how to play, and now I have a little bit of a collection. And I've got some professional musicians that I hang with occasionally, play with them
very nice.
Fairly often, which is fun. And I've been hired to be the lead vocalist for a lot of big bands, to sing. Somebody asks you to, wear a tuxedo, stand in front of 1,000 people, drink Jack Daniels, sing Sinatra. Say yes.
You can do it.
Just say yes to that.
Yeah, we'll make it work.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your, in closing, a couple things about your golf tournament. You do that every year still?
I did for a long time,
okay.
And they decided to move on without me. But, for many, many years, and I'm very proud of the fact that there's probably between 50 and 100 houses in downtown Jacksonville that have my name on them, along with Dolores Weaver's from
So
Habit Jax.
Habit Jax.
It was a Habit Jax tournament for the longest time. And then when they decided to do a different kind of fundraising, I was asked by a local charity. There is really no Make-A-Wish in North Florida. Mm-hmm. Dreams Come True. And Lane Silverfield asked me to put my name on their golf tournament. And I raised about $6 million over 10, 15 years for them.
Wow.
Until they decided to go in a different direction as well.
Wow, amazing. And wrap up here. A couple things. What do you think is different about covering sports today versus when you first started? I think it's harder, easier.
I think
more
you
complex?
touched on it. I think the players, because the players are also involved in social media. Mm-hmm. I think it's the players are much more sensitive to what may be said about them. The ones that really excel are the ones that ignore that. In fact, Bill Belichick put it on the door, ignore the noise. And he's 100% right. And, I think it's harder. So it's harder to create those relationships that we were able to create in my era.
So interesting that the communication, there's so many more ways to communicate, but the relationships are harder. It's so interesting.
Just harder. And that's why, for years, Bill Parcells, at the end of press conferences, everybody would leave and he would say, hey, Amelia, Sam, Tony, come here. And he'd give these guys background on what was really going on and help create a relationship. And that's, Tom Coughlin admits to this day that was the most difficult part of his job when he was first here, because it was his first head coaching NFL job. And he changed in New York somewhat at the request of the general manager and his wife, Judy. But that relationship thing is the thing that drives what real reporters can do. Mm-hmm. I had a guy, used to hammer me on X all the time. And finally I said to him, I didn't see you at practice today. And he said, well, you don't have to come to practice to cover the team. And I said, oh, I didn't see you in the press conference today. He said, I've never been at a press conference. I said, oh, so you cover the coverage. Mm-hmm. You only cover what I tell you is going on. That made him really mad, by the way.
Yeah.
He didn't like that.
What would you say your advice would be, young kid coming out of college that wants to have a career like you've had? What would you work on right out of the gate?
I would probably find the medium that suited you best. So in my era, it was either television, radio, or newspaper. Now it's so much more widespread. If you find that medium,
Specialize.
yeah, find a medium, whether it's podcasting or whether it's radio or whether it's live TV or whatever. I can tell you my fondest memories are doing live play-by-play on events, whether it was football or baseball or basketball or polo. You know what they call the periods in polo, by the way?
What's that?
Chukkers. You know how many there are? 6.
How many? 6.
They switch horses out too.
Interesting.
Not players, horses.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
But anyway, and you want to talk about a sport of kings?
Yeah.
But anyway, so you do that. That's some of my fondest memories, and doing the news day after day. For a long time, we just did the 6 and the 11. Then we did the 5, the 5:30, the 6, the 6:30, the 10, the 10:30, the 11. And then we'd stick around and tape 2 more for the morning. So it still was the right medium for me. And 20 years on Lex and Terry, I did, kind of a nationally syndicated radio.
Yeah, for sure.
Which was also the right medium for me because those guys were friends of mine and we were able, at least I was able to walk up to the line, and they were always jumping over it, but I walked up to the line on a regular basis. So I think a young person needs to kind of find the medium that excites them, that they want to be involved in, and then realize that being there is 80% of the solution, and the other 20% is creating a relationship with people that are going to give you information that nobody else has.
Interesting. Well, Sam Kouvaris, thank you very much. Amazing career. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me. It was a ton of fun.
The Hometown Jax podcast is recorded and produced by First Coast Mortgage Funding, located in the heart of Jacksonville. Do you want to be our next guest? Visit our website at hometownjaxpodcast.com. We can't wait to hear your story.